Have you ever found a quilt pattern that you love, but it's not quite the right size? In today's video, I'm going to show you 4 simple ways to make any quilt bigger. Let's dive in. The first way to make any quilt bigger is to simply add more quilt blocks. This is a super easy way to adjust the size of your quilt pattern. For a visual today, I'm going to be using these half square triangles. Each of these half square triangles are going to act as one individual quilt block, just to give you an example of how this quilt can be made bigger. So each of these half square triangles are 4 inches finished, so piecing them all together will give us a 12 by 12 inch finished quilt. But if we wanted to make this quilt bigger, all we have to do to make it a little bit longer is to add some more quilt blocks. I love this method for making block-based quilts bigger because it's so easy just to make a few extra blocks. So now after we've pieced that bottom row on, it makes this quilt 4 inches bigger, making it 12 inches by 16 inches finished. You can keep adding blocks to the side if you wanted to make it even bigger, and I love this method because you can just keep adding blocks until you get the custom size you want. The next way that you can make your quilt bigger is to add borders. So again, I'm going to use these half square triangles to act as our quilts in the middle. I'm going to piece them all together and then add borders on the top and the sides. Adding borders is probably one of the easiest ways to add width or length to your quilt, and it's super easy to customize. All you have to do is just make your top and bottom borders wider or your side borders wider to get that desired size. The next way that you can increase your quilt size is by adding sashing. And this one is also super easy if you have kind of a basic understanding of sashing. So sashing is just additional material that goes in between each of those quilt blocks. This method does require a little bit of extra math. I'm not going to touch on the math too much in this video, but if that's something you want me to cover, I definitely will. Just let me know in the comments below. But if you want to add sashing to your quilt, I recommend just drawing it out and doing that math by hand to make sure everything is correct, and don't forget that seam allowance. In this example, I'm using 2.5 inch strips for my sashing, which end up being 2 inches after the quilt is finished, and I'm piecing the smaller pieces in between each block, and then the longer sashing strips in between each row to get sashing in between each of my blocks. You can leave your quilt like this if you like the look, or you can add additional borders to add a little bit of extra width and length. And here is what this quilt looks like with the added borders. With the added 2 inch sashing and borders, this quilt goes from a 12 inch square to a 20 inch square, and you can make it even bigger by increasing that border size. The last way to make your quilt bigger that I'm going to cover in this video is by turning your blocks on point. The diagonal measurement of a square is bigger than the sides, so this increases your quilt size automatically just by turning everything on a 45-degree angle. You will need some additional background fabric or additional blocks to fill in those gaps in the center, and then to also make the side and corner triangles. Turning your blocks on point can give a whole new look to your quilt, so I really like trying out this option for making a quilt bigger. Here I'm laying out all of my pieces so that it's easy for me to piece together, and then this is what the finished quilt block looks like. Just by turning these blocks on point, this square goes from 12 inches finished to around 17 inches finished. Let's review all the ways that you can make your quilt top bigger. You can add blocks, you can add borders, you can add sashing and also borders, and you can turn your blocks on point. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on on-point quilts, check out my free quilt pattern and video tutorial, Bunting. This will show you how to assemble an on-point quilt. I'll see you there.